may be hopelessly divided on most things, but on one issue, our swampy Congress is unusually bipartisan. A single piece of legislation, nearly 1,000 pages long, costs you, the taxpayer, $956 billion. And it's all set to be renewed in a few months' time. A lot of that money goes towards subsidizing giant agriculture companies at the expense of small farmers who get screwed and consumers who get disgusting industrialized food that literally makes us sick. The Farm Bill is tonight's Swamp Watch. The Farm Bill was first drafted in the 1930s to help farmers hit by the Depression, but that good intention has been totally corrupted by the swamp. The Farm Bill has to be renewed by Congress every 5 years, and with nearly $1 trillion in funding and subsidies at stake, lobbying and special interests swarm the bill like flies to a pile of dung. More than 300 organizations spent money lobbying the last Farm Bill that passed in 2014. Much of that was carried out by giant agribusinesses like Monsanto. In 2017, Monsanto made nearly $8 billion in profits. They recently gave their CEO, Hugh Grant, no, not that Hugh Grant, a 64% raise to $19.5 million a year. As the world's largest supplier of genetically modified seeds to farmers, Monsanto has a direct interest in the subsidies provided through the Farm Bill. So they spent a cool $36 million lobbying the federal government in the 5 years leading up to the 2014 Farm Bill, and they certainly knew where to spend it. One of their lobbyists was Blanche Lincoln, a former Democratic senator from Arkansas. She also just happens to be a former chairwoman of the Senate Committee on Agriculture. Another of their lobbyists, Brian Arthur Pomper, formerly served as Chief Trade Counsel to Senator Max Baucus, who was a member of, you guessed it, the Senate Committee on Agriculture. Of course, the members of the relevant congressional committees also got their dues from these swampy interests. In the election cycle leading up to the last Farm Bill, then House Agriculture Committee Chairman Frank Lucas received more than $744,000 in campaign contributions from the agribusiness sector, nearly half of all his donations. In the Senate, then Agriculture Committee Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow received more contributions from the crop production industry than any other senator. She brought in more than $280,000 in the election cycle before the last Farm Bill. One study found that during the 3 months that Congress debated the legislation, donations from big agriculture spiked by 40%. And there's a very clear quid for this particular quote. Take a look at this chart. Members of Congress who voted to pass the last Farm Bill got way more money from agribusiness interests than members who voted against it. Isn't that neat? So, what does big business get from all this spending? Government subsidies, of course. The Farm Bill authorizes over $20 billion a year. Farm Bill supporters claim that these subsidies protect small farms who would fail without the safety net. But that is an out-and-out lie. Over the 20 years from 1995 through 2014, nearly 90% of farm subsidies went to the biggest 20% of farms. Those are the farms that are more secure financially and better able to adapt to changes in the market. If we're going to have subsidies at all, shouldn't they go to small family farms who are the most vulnerable? Of course they should. But those small family farms are just good, honest people trying to make a living. The swamp doesn't care about them. Small family farmers are out in the fields. They're not swanning around Washington, taking members of Congress out to dinner in swanky restaurants and handing out campaign checks. As a result, while small farms account for 88% of all farms, they only receive 40% of government payments. Just another example of how the wealthy elite use swampy politics to keep themselves on top. Since 1933, when the Farm Bill was first enacted, the number of farms has dramatically decreased, while the average farm size has significantly increased. That's because the dirty details of the legislation and the swampy lobbying behind its creation incentivize farmers to go bigger and bigger, leaving many small farmers struggling to stay afloat. The Wall Street Journal interviewed one such farmer who grew up on his parents' 160-acre farm. At 29 years old, he wants to keep the family farm alive, but his farm is too small to produce enough crops to support his family. So, in addition to working his own farm, he also works for other farmers to generate more income. When some farmland came available nearby, he looked into renting it to increase his output. But by the time he heard of it, it was already taken by someone who owns over 30,000 acres. He never stood a chance. favouring of larger farms is not just bad news for small farmers, it might even be worse news for consumers. You see, larger farms, especially poultry, pork and dairy farms, tend to value efficiency and profit over health and hygiene. So as large farms have become factory farms, they've also become a playground for foodborne illnesses. The Centre for Disease Control estimates that every year 48 million people get sick from a foodborne illness. Of those, 128,000 are hospitalised and 3,000 are killed. Experts attribute the rise of foodborne illness to what they call concentrated animal feeding operations, in other words, factory farms. The stress and unsanitary conditions of factory farms weaken animals' immune system, making them more susceptible to infection. Overcrowding allows diseases to spread quickly and easily. The results? Here's just a few examples. A salmonella outbreak at Foster Farms that ended in July 2014 spanned 17 months, 29 states, and 634 illnesses, including over 240 hospitalizations. In July 2015, Barber Foods recalled over 1.7 million pounds of chicken, fearing it could be contaminated with salmonella. And let's not forget the E. coli outbreak at Chipotle that led to 20 hospitalizations and 52 illnesses in 9 different states. The whole farm bill system makes me sick. The lobbying and donations that drive political support, the billions in subsidies that favour larger farms, and the petri dish of so-called food produced as a result. President Trump has proposed some significant cuts to the farm bill, set to be renewed this year. But we need more than that and a cut in subsidies. We need a revolution in our entire agricultural system. Please tell me what you think of that. Follow us on Twitter and have your say at Steve Hilton X and at NextRev FNC.